to Texas. Michigan State beat both of their rivals on the road to make a run to the Big Ten championship game. And of course, Notre Dame was just a few plays away from being perfect, but lost heartbreakers on the road to Clemson and Stanford. This was also the year of the wild finish in college football. Michigan State beat Michigan on a routine punt that went awry, resulting in a last-second touchdown. Georgia Tech returned a blocked field goal with no time left on the clock to beat Florida State. And then Miami beat Duke on the craziest kickoff return and probably the most illegal kickoff return you'll ever see. It was also a year to say goodbye to some coaching legends, with Steve Spurrier, Frank Beamer, and Gary Pinkel retiring. As always, college football gave its fans plenty of upsets and down-to-the-wire conference races. It's been a truly excellent, competitive, and exciting regular season. And now that all the games have been played, it's time to release the final Amway Coaches Poll. There it is. Number 1, the only undefeated team in the country, Clemson. Number 2, Alabama. Number 3, Oklahoma, stays ahead of Michigan State, who won the Big Ten last night. Number 5, Ohio State. And number 6, Stanford. I suspect the final college football playoff rankings that will come out shortly might mirror the Amway Coaches Poll. And now let's introduce our panel to talk about this historic day in college football. Our first panelist just completed his 20th season as a head coach at the FBS level and will take Cincinnati to its third straight bowl game later this month. His 2004 Auburn team, which finished undefeated but wasn't given the opportunity to play for a national championship, arguably helped set the stage for the creation of the college football playoff. He's been instrumental over the years in working on issues to help improve college football and is a great advocate for all coaches. He's been president of the AFCA Board of Trustees and a former AFCA Coach of the Year Award winner in 2004. Please welcome Tommy Tuberville. Our second panelist has done the unthinkable at Duke, turning around a program that seemed hopeless a decade ago and has made them into one of the ACC's most consistent winners. The Blue Devils will be making their 4th consecutive bowl game later this month, adding to a legacy that includes as an offensive coordinator at Tennessee. He's one of the most respected coaches in the game, a former winner of the Bobby Dodd Coach of the Year Award, and a 2013 AFCA Coach of the Year winner. We are honored to bring David Cutcliffe in here today. Please say hello to him.
Thank you, Dan.
Our third panelist is a familiar name in Southern college football. He was a longtime NFL player, then transitioned into a coaching career that took him to Georgia Tech, Alabama, Kentucky, and then the TV booth as an analyst for ESPN. Then in 2008, he came back to coaching and helped build the Georgia State program from scratch before retiring after the 2012 season. In 1989, he was named both SEC Coach of the Year and Bobby Dodd National Coach of the Year, and we are very pleased to have him with us today. Let's welcome Coach Bill Curry. All right, gentlemen, we're about 15 minutes away from getting the bracket for the playoff field. I think we kind of know who the top 4 teams are going to be: Clemson, Alabama, Oklahoma, Michigan State. Not quite sure of the order, but let's run through these teams really quick. And each of you just give me an impression of Clemson this season with Coach Dabo Swinney leading them to an undefeated record.
Very athletic. They play both offense and defense, and that's what it takes to go undefeated in major college football. You can't be one-sided. They've got a very athletic quarterback, good running backs, but defensively they're very quick, and that's got them to an ACC championship and probably going to get them a number 1 seed in the playoffs.
Coach Cutcliffe, you're in the same league as Clemson. What impressed you about their team this year?
You know, I've seen them a lot on tape. We didn't play them, but we played North Carolina, and I knew going into the game how good North Carolina was on the perimeter and at quarterback, and it didn't surprise. I think their corner play is what all of us want. It's so good that they take these other guys, their safeties, their backers, their front, and they are so fast, so athletic, and when you have corners like they've got, they make it difficult for people. And I think North Carolina was 11 of 33 throwing the ball last night. You can't play much better pass defense than that against a great offensive team in North Carolina.
Coach Kerr, you were telling me that you had Dabo Swinney as a freshman walk-on at Alabama. What about the job he's done to build this program?
I think it's a big part of the Clemson magic. His personality is contagious. He believes in his people, and he does it in a way that works. And there are a lot of us who might believe in our people, and it doesn't convert to performance. But he's had those players playing beyond themselves virtually every year. This year's team is a virtual, probably 90% replacement of last year's team. So you had a lot of new guys that had not started, and here they are undefeated. That's an incredible accomplishment. And I know I'm biased because Dabo was one of our players, but I think so far, all that wackiness you see from him, that's him being Dabo. And as long as he is that which he really is, the authenticity comes through to his players, and you can kind of sense that. We awarded him, I'm part of the Bobby Dodd Coach of the Year committee, and we awarded him the Bobby Dodd Coach of the Year a couple of years ago, and seeing him interact with his players off the field in a banquet setting was another revelation. So I really give him an enormous amount of the credit for this thing. And he's got a quarterback who's also magic. He just makes things happen. He makes it look easy. Deshaun Watson is a Georgia native, but grew up kind of a Clemson fan, and they're really hard to beat. I think they'll be tough to beat.
You know, Alabama, obviously not a surprise that they're in the playoff because Nick Saban did the same thing last year. But, you know, the SEC probably was a little bit down this year. What do we know, or what do we think we know about this Alabama team? And I'll open it up to anybody here because, you know, they started the year with that loss to Ole Miss and didn't really look great, but rolled through the rest of the SEC. Do you think they're this is as good of an Alabama team as we've seen in the past?
I think that you're seeing the Southeastern Conference, which may be the least experience at quarterback, maybe in some regards not as much talent at quarterback as we've seen in past years. So in a lot of people's eyes, it's made it difficult to measure Alabama. But
well, what would you know about talent at
quarterback? I don't know anything. Yeah, there we go. But I do think this. People need to remember the physicality of the Southeastern Conference is still there. The thing that it's always going to start with Nick is defense. And it's going to start with physical play. And if they can run the football, which they've done down this stretch, if they find a way to run the football on people and play defense, that's still a recipe. And a kicking game, by the way, that's still a recipe that I know of that wins a lot of football games.
Yeah, that defense, and especially their defensive front, I mean, I think they're probably 3 deep with NFL players on that defensive front. But do you have to have an elite quarterback, do you think, to win a championship?
I don't think you do, as long as you got a defense and a running game. And that's what Nick's always built his around. He's had good running quarterbacks before. But he's solid. And as David just said, I've talked to pro scouts. They've come into our campus for the last 3 months, and this is the best defensive front seven they've ever seen in college football. Now, that goes back a long way. But they usually talk about depth and speed and size. But they've got a running back. They've got a defense. They're playing 1980s football. They will play somebody else that's playing in the 2000th century in the playoffs. It will be interesting to see how they play against either a quarterback at Clemson or a quarterback from Oklahoma. Michigan State's a lot like they are, but it will be a very interesting contest when Alabama takes the field against a team that throws the ball down the field.
Well, if the committee goes by what the coaches poll has done from a seeding perspective, we could get an Alabama-Oklahoma semifinal. And, you know, this team that Bob Stoops has lost that game to Texas, still don't understand how that happened except for just it's a rivalry type of game and anything can happen. But ever since then, they've been lights out, and they've pretty much dominated everybody the back half of the season. What do you think about this Oklahoma team? And is the Big 12, you know, maybe a little overrated, a little underrated? What were your thoughts?
I don't think the Big 12 is underrated, certainly. I think maybe Oklahoma took Texas lightly, although that's an easy cop-out when somebody doesn't play well. And I think it's possible that Oklahoma could, if you look at what people have done in these circumstances in the past, Oklahoma has had a tough time in the big games from time to time, not always, but they've lost some big games in the national championship, of the national championship caliber. And I think that there's a risk that could happen again. I don't know enough about the dynamics with the coaching staff and the team. I haven't had a chance to study their team the way I have the teams that are closer to home. But what Bob Stoops does is he always gets his team to click on all cylinders. And if they're playing lights out, they're going to be hard to beat.
Well, they're much better defensively, I think, than they've been the last couple years. And then Baker Mayfield has really made all the difference for them because he can run around a little bit. I mean, that's the kind of quarterback that could give Alabama problems potentially.
Yeah, I think that Lincoln Riley, a young offensive coordinator that I know real well, has given Baker some freedom. They're up-tempo. It's one of the things Ole Miss uses when they play Alabama, and Nick, they're going to get back on the line of scrimmage, and they're certainly going to be able to do that. I think the thing, and Tommy can talk a little bit more specific about Oklahoma's defense, but those two running backs and receiver, they have weapons on offense. So they're not one-dimensional in any form. They may be the most balanced run-pass team that's going to be in the playoffs.
Coaching in the Big 12 the last few years at Texas Tech, this is truly a Big 12 offense. I mean, they're going to spread the field. They're going to throw it down the field. They're going to be very unpredictable. If you don't put a lot of people up to stop the run, they'll run it all day. It's not one of those where they're going to throw it ever down. But Baker Mayfield is the guy. And for them to win, he's going to have to be the guy to get it off. Because when they play the good defenses like Clemson or Michigan State or Alabama, they're going to have to throw the ball, and they're going to throw against man coverage with pressure. So it'll be interesting to see how they adjust from going to the Big 12 to the either SEC, Big 10, or the ACC defenses. But that kid's a heck of an athlete, good football player. Can he stay healthy in 2 games, because he's going to take some shots.
Now, Michigan State's a team that has won a lot of close games. They lost one close game to Nebraska this year, but they almost seemed like a team of destiny in some ways, because you watch how they beat Michigan on that blocked, dropped punt, the way they beat Ohio State on the road with a backup quarterback on a last-second field goal. But I do think it speaks to the toughness that Mark D'Antonio has instilled in his team, because you look at their record the last 3 years, they hardly lose. So I do think they're going to be a pretty tough out.
Well, Mark D'Antonio, Bob Stoops, Nick Saban, they're all 3 defensive head coaches, except for Dabo Swinney. He's an offensive guy. And those guys are going to live off defense first and running the football. And Mark's done that. Mark is they're well coached. They've got a very athletic quarterback that can make plays. They should be undefeated. I thought that was a very unusual play, obviously, where they got beat by Nebraska. But they fit in very well. I think they fit very well in this +1 system with the playoff, and I think they can beat anybody.
I think the way they have, not just this year, I think they have a program, and they have a way of doing things, and Mark does a great job of that. So you see how they won the game last night inside of 2 minutes, inside a minute. They've done it a year ago. You said a team of destiny. I'm not sure those guys believe they're going to lose a big game. I believe they're going to go into this playoff believing they're going to be the national champions, and they've got weapons, and they've got the wherewithal to do it. I think it's really a tough call.
They beat a good Iowa team last night, too.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that was maybe one of the big takeaways from the championship game, was just how good Iowa is. And frankly, I'm a little bit surprised that they dropped behind Ohio State in the coaches poll. You know, I know Ohio State and what they are, getting maybe some benefit of the doubt, but I really thought Iowa showed themselves to be a truly elite team.
Before we leave Michigan State, I sat there last night. I'm an old lineman. I know I don't look like a lineman, but I was a lineman. When you watch a drive, I have never seen a 22-play drive, 9 minutes, with one pass thrown. I believe it was one pass that was thrown. They ran one option with a guy that's not an option quarterback, and they knocked it in the end zone. What happens to an old lineman in a situation like that is you don't want to watch the game. You don't want to coach the game. You want to play. You want to be in the middle of that and get your nose blooded. And I think Michigan State built something there that they can build upon even more not just this year, but for a lot of years. I think we're going to hear about the drive for a long, long time, and it might just propel them to a national championship this time. That was the darndest thing I've ever seen.
One pass.
Yeah.
So you're saying you don't need us quarterbacks? Is that what you're saying?
We need quarterbacks that understand their limitations.
Okay, all right. I got that. Just hand it off, right?
Yes, just give it to that Scott guy and
There
watch
you
it.
go.
And that guy was a freshman. And they didn't block anybody on the last play. I don't know if anybody else stayed up late enough to see that. They blocked nobody, and he runs through all of them and gets it across. And that's just incredible. It was an amazing thing and an amazing achievement for a true freshman or anybody else for that matter.
So now we're 2 years into this playoff. You know, last year we sat up here and we weren't quite sure which way it was going to go. The committee went with Ohio State over Baylor and TCU. It was slightly controversial, but Ohio State ended up winning the whole thing, and that kind of ended the conversation. This year, it's a pretty clean top four for the committee. I think they probably could have met for about 5 minutes this morning and hashed the whole thing out. Having seen 2 years of this, do you think that this system is going to stick, or do you think that it will eventually go to 8?
Well, we're in it for a while.
Yeah, we got, 5 more years? Something like that,
Supposedly
yeah.
10, but you never know if they can always change it if they want to. These guys never get in a contract they can't get out of.
From my perspective, let's remember these are college students. This isn't the National Football League. 8's not going to be any more right than 4. Sometimes 4 is not going to be as right as 2. I like where we are. There's 2 great football games, other bowl games that are meaningful. Being a top 10 team, being a top 12 team, top 14 team is a huge thing for college athletes. Let's not forget that as we move forward.
Let's don't make it a survival contest. That's what we all as coaches don't want to do, play 4 or 5 extra games, because these kids have to practice, not just a game, they have to practice, prepare, and it's an awfully physical sport, especially as big and fast these kids are now.
The greatest shock for a football player, in my opinion, is to leave college, and we played 10 games with maybe a bowl game. That was an eternity ago. But to go from playing 10 games to playing 20 games, and if you go to the Super Bowl, you play 23. That's the greatest shock to every part of your system. You get beat up in ways you didn't even know you could get beat up that much. Now we're starting to get toward 14. We want to add some more games, and add more teams. If we're going to do that, we must add scholarships. And David and Tommy could tell us a lot better about what quantitatively would be a good number if we were to add, but you got to have more players if you're going to wear young people out. And oh, by the way, final exams get thrown in there somewhere, and we're supposed to be college students, just like David and Tommy indicated.
Well, and you have 18-year-old bodies. This is not 25-year-old folks. People that have only been in college less than a year that are into this circumstance. And the other part of it is you get into scholarship, you get into Title IX, you're starting to get into a really complex circumstance of expense in numbers. But Tommy's right, let's not make it a survival. Is the best team going to win 3 games into a playoff? Maybe the team that stays the healthiest wins in that regard. And I'd rather see the best team win, and I think we're in a good spot.
And
Right?
thank
One
goodness
other
we've
point
got 4. If we had 2, it would really be difficult to pick number 2. A couple of years ago, out of this group, who would be the number 2
Yeah,
guy?
out of this group, I think Alabama would probably get the benefit of the doubt because of the program they've built and the SEC and all of that. But, you look from a resume standpoint, really Oklahoma and Michigan State, to be honest with you, to go on the road and beat Ohio State, to go on the road and beat Michigan, and then to beat an undefeated Iowa team, that's an awfully impressive group of teams in Michigan State.
And been a very good football team the last few years, not just this year. Michigan State's been a good football team.
And by the way, Mark said he put that play in on that punt. He put that in years ago.
Yeah.
It wasn't an accident.
Yeah, Dabo put a play in on punt, taking a punt too. He didn't mean to.
I don't think that was
Before we
intentional.
leave the subject of being worn down, Oklahoma hasn't had to play a game recently. Is that good or bad?
I wanted to ask about that.
I want to
because
ask these two guys.
There's been a lot of controversy among coaches about evening everything up. Does everything have to be equal across the board? The Big 12 doesn't play a championship game. Last year it probably hurt them. This year it helped them. They've got 10 teams in their league, but it's an interesting situation. I think after this year they probably won't want a championship game.
Yeah, I think it'll hurt them in the long run. This year it didn't, but it'll hurt somebody else. So I think they need a championship game. There's no reason for them to sit out and play one less tough game, not just a regular game. So I think the Big 12 is going to have to make, even if they just have 10 teams, still have a championship team.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see how I think the big question for the committee, and we're going to learn it here in a few minutes, we'll relay it to everyone in the audience, is whether Oklahoma or Michigan State gets that 3 seed, because that'll impact the semifinal matchups. Also want to just touch briefly on Notre Dame. They were a couple plays away from being undefeated, a very good team this year. Do you think this will impact them in terms of joining a conference? Or, I know that there's a lot of coaches who want to see them in a league.
Well, they are a member of the ACC in every sport but football. We're already playing contractually. The conference owes them, I think, 4 or 5 games a year. We go up there next year and play them up there. They're in a situation where I think it would behoove them more than they think. But again, you're getting into television, you're getting into contracts. I don't know what the circumstances are with them and NBC and how many years you're into it. I think Notre Dame really will think hard and long about remaining an independent in this world of the Big Four.
Well, they certainly, they schedule, I think, a very representative schedule. They don't play a lot of cupcakes. They challenge themselves, but it's hard to go undefeated, and you don't have that conference championship game to get in. I think that does make it tough for them, but I know they value independence. Maybe they give it a little longer to see how it works out. But they were very close to getting in this year, really.
Very good team with a lot of injuries.
Yeah.
Brian Kelly did a heck of a job with what he did. I think he went through 2 quarterbacks, 2 or 3 running backs. They're a very talented team.
All right, I'm being given the seedings for the playoff. Clemson is your number 1 seed, no surprise. Alabama is your number 2 seed, and Michigan State is your number 3 seed.
Ooh.
And so Oklahoma's 4.
All
so
right.
they moved Michigan State to that 3 seed. They'll play Alabama. I imagine that will be a game that takes place in the Cotton Bowl. That will be the Cotton Bowl. So Alabama, I see some Alabama fans in here. Go ahead and you can go ahead and start booking your trip to Dallas for the Cotton Bowl. So Clemson, Michigan State in the Orange Bowl. I know actually Dabo and Mark D'Antonio are pretty good friends. I believe so. That'll be an interesting matchup.
Clemson, Oklahoma.
No. I'm sorry, Clemson, Oklahoma. My fault. I got confused there. Yes, Clemson, Oklahoma. Alabama, Michigan State. So, that's the 4 seed Oklahoma. That's a dangerous 4 seed as far as I'm concerned, because they're a little bit like Ohio State was last year.
I think the only reason they're a 4 seed is the conversation we just had.
Because of the conference
They
championship
did not
game.
have to prove their way in, and I think that's a statement from the committee. There's an issue there, and I think the Big 12 better listen, because it could have gone another way.
Yeah.
If you're the number 4 seed, that means 5's right there breathing on your neck. Do you know who's 5 yet?
I'm not sure that. Do we know who number 5 is? Yeah, they haven't revealed that yet, so
Okay.
we'll find that out. But I imagine, I would think it would be Stanford, but I could be wrong.
I would hope.
Yeah, winning the Pac-12 and playing the schedule that they did. That's a really excellent team. So now we know the bracket. Not a huge surprise, but initial impressions and who do you expect to play for the championship? Just seeing it, at first blush.
Well, you got 2 spread teams playing each other at the beginning, and then you're playing Alabama playing Michigan State, the 2 smash mouth teams. So you're going to eliminate one of each, and then they're going to go head to head. That'll be interesting. I was kind of hoping it'd be the other way around.
Right.
But I think that you're going to see 2 very good spread teams that will get after it, 2 good quarterbacks. I think that, again, you'll see about a 2-hour football game with Michigan State and Alabama. And then you'll have a team playing each other, the one pro set team and one spread team. Very interesting.
What time do they kick off in the Orange Bowl? Do we know that? Does anybody know the answer to that? If it's late enough, they might play on into the next day.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which game is first, but that's the New Year's Eve game.
So spread.
It could be.
So the committee's not going to reveal the other rankings until later because they have to fill those other bowl slots for the New Year's Six. So they'll announce those this afternoon. The first thing I think about with Clemson and Oklahoma is, I do think that Oklahoma has got a bit of an edge in the running game, and I think that may that may give them a chance. But I'll tell you, that Clemson defense has been good against the run all year.
Clemson runs the ball better than people think.
Better than you think, yeah.
Yes, their offensive line is big, really talented, really athletic, particularly in the interior. I like Clemson in that game. I think Clemson's real. They have, as Tommy, they're playing defense and it's real, and they're playing offense and it's real. And both of them have outstanding quarterbacks, but their quarterback is really, really gifted in every aspect. And both teams have huge big play potential. And it's going to be an interesting thing. Now, Oklahoma's seen a few people like Clemson with Baylor and Oklahoma State. Maybe that's an advantage to them. Maybe Clemson hadn't seen people quite like that, although Larry Fedora
that North Carolina
in North Carolina that's the origin, he's a Big 12 guy.
Right.
I think the one thing that Dabo is going to have to do between now and that game is to get his team to play more discipline. They had 7 penalties in the first half last night. They've got a reputation for turnovers that they've earned, and I don't think they'll get away with that. I think they're going to have to play buttoned up, but I think they're good enough to win the game.
Does everyone here favor Alabama in the matchup with Michigan State, or do you think that that's going to be a little closer than people think?
I think it's advantage Alabama because they've been in the playoff before. A lot of these kids, it's a totally different animal when you set off about 3 weeks. You got to go through all the hype.
Right.
2 times in a row, not once, but twice. And I know Alabama lost last year, but the coaching staff knows how to prepare. They've got a running game and a defense. I'd always take that over anything else.
Yeah, I think Alabama is equipped because of the experience of what they had a year ago. What I've seen of this team is they've gotten more serious as the season's gone along. And I think they will be hard to beat. I think they have a good opportunity, probably the best bet to win the national championship right now. If I were to pick it, would be Alabama. Clemson's in our conference. I think they're very capable, but it would be hard because of what Tommy said.
We picked Alabama last year. Remember, they got beat the first week.
Yeah, I know. So what do we know,
wrong,
right?
Yeah.
Well, I sat there last night, and I jotting down notes, and I wrote this. And I've been watching Alabama for a long, long time, not just when I played against them or coached against them or coached for them. I've been watching them since 1960, and I have never seen this many great athletes on an Alabama team. The front guys, the secondary guys, the speed outside, and they're freshmen running down there taking the ball away from 2 defenders in the end zone, and that's not going to go away. So and with their dominating people up front, I didn't know about what Tommy told us. That when the pro scouts tell you this is more talent than they've ever seen on a front 7, those guys have been doing it a long time. They know what they're talking about. And I think Alabama is odds-on favorite to win this thing this year.
I do think they did Alabama a little bit of a favor here because even though I do think Michigan State's an excellent team, I think if you're trying to beat Alabama, you'd rather take 2 shots with a spread team as opposed to just one. In other words, they're only going to have to face one spread team to win the national championship, which has been sort of their Achilles heel, the last few years.
1 week of preparation for a spread team is hard, but the same thing for the spread team if they were to play Alabama or Michigan State, getting ready for a smash mouth team. So very similar circumstances for both Michigan State and Alabama, and very similar for Clemson and Oklahoma. It's going to be about the quarterback on one side, running back on the other.
Dan, I tell you, and Bill brought this up about the drive last night. If you want to study the Michigan State-Alabama game, and I don't know the answer to this, but if I were going to have time to do that, I would go straight to Michigan State's offensive front. I would look at their ages. I would look at the number of starts that they've had in their career for Michigan State to beat Alabama. And they may have it, I don't know, because they did something special last night. If they've got a multitude of guys that are special players that have started for a long time, that gives them a chance, because that's where the war is going to start in that game.
Yeah, the front at Ohio State's very similar to the front at Alabama, and Michigan State beat Ohio State at Ohio State.
Right.
So,
and Ohio State a year ago was able to take their offensive front and beat Alabama. And so I would immediately study Michigan State's front to see how this matchup is going to look.
I do think the one thing that will help Michigan State is they got 3 weeks off. Connor Cook, their quarterback, I thought last night was clearly still not healthy. He's had that shoulder injury. He was missing throws he normally makes. I think that 3 weeks he'll kind of be able to get back on track. But I do think Michigan State is up against it. I want to ask you guys a little bit, what do you think Urban Meyer is thinking right now? I mean, he had a team that going into the year, everyone had ranked number one. Everyone had just sort of given them the national championship preseason. How hard is it to repeat?
It's almost impossible. I've been on a couple at University of Miami where we had a better team the next year and we couldn't run the table because it's just something there that the players' overconfidence, less preparation, not as hungry. Not saying that happened to Ohio State. They've got a heck of a football team, but they had quarterback problems during the year. And so they put themselves in a situation where they couldn't be as consistent as last year.
They started the year a little lesser than everybody thought they would. Just go back. The reality is quarterback situation was never settled. I would say if he were doing anything, he might have taken a different approach with his quarterbacks than he did with this not saying anything. It's just not normal for a college football team not to have its leader be the quarterback.
Yeah, very tough.
You try to imagine being 19 years old and for 8 months or 9 months or however long it is, everybody in the world is telling you you're the greatest thing since bubblegum. You don't prepare the same way. You don't go in the weight room the same way. This happens to NFL teams. That's why the NFL guys have a hard time repeating. It's the same deal. It's just we're such victims of our technology and all the praise and the Hollywood stuff, and guys are going to make this. They're making raps, music, and all that. They're not thinking about winning the next national championship, and it is hard to repeat. Really
They're not
hard.
even good raps either, are they?
No, they're terrible. They're terrible.
Well, I believe the only teams in the modern era that have won back-to-back was Nebraska under Tom Osborne and then Alabama in 2011 and 2012. I think shows you how difficult that job is. Is there a team that is outside the top four that you feel like if they had gotten in could have done some damage?
Stanford. I mean,
Iowa.
right now, there's no question.
Stanford?
Yeah,
Iowa and Stanford.
I say Ohio State because, they're loaded. They've got a lot of players, and they hate it today that they lost that game because they were right on the verge.
You guys are almost making the argument for 8 because I would have liked to have seen some of those matchups. But on the other hand, I do think the way it played out last night, your conference championship game was very important. The Big Ten conference championship game, we know the SEC always is, but I think it's added value to the conference championships.
Let me ask you an important ACC question. North Carolina wins that game by 2 touchdowns. Are they in?
Probably not.
Probably not. I think Stanford. I think
And
Stanford or Ohio
what
State.
becomes right about that at
We'll
that point?
lose at the end of the year. That's the only significance that the committee would give you.
Well, they lost their first game and they've
Right.
Oh, I
done
understand.
nothing but
Yeah.
run the table. I would have been disappointed that they weren't, because you're beating the number 1 team.
I agree.
That would have been an interesting scenario that could have been really upsetting to a lot of people.
Now, this year was obviously pretty easy, pretty clean. I do want to ask you guys, when you rank your teams, when you do your ballots, how do you go about evaluating? Is it who you lost to? Is it who you beat? Do you consider margin of victory, or is it just sort of an overall feel?
I do just schedule, how tough your schedule is. That's what I look, and who they played. Because some people don't play the near as tough a schedule, and so you have to go by that. It's just, especially if you're going to have a playoff, you've got to do it the right way. And, there's some uneven circumstances, obviously.
Use technology, as you said. I spent a little time studying it. I have a routine Sunday morning, and it's part of my Sunday morning routine. And first of all, is just schedule. And the league, when you play in a tough league, some of the league teams that are at the more bottom of your league, these guys got a balanced league. You got to play every week. And those teams that come out of those leagues that are very, very demanding won't pay attention to that. And then if they've had losses to teams that, and it's college football, it's the tournament starts game 1. If they've had losses to really average teams, that bothers me a little bit.
A great man told me one time, and he's sitting right there. His name is Dr. Homer Rice. He was our boss at Georgia Tech, and he created the structure that allowed Georgia Tech to come back and be a wonderful program in every way. But when we first got there, he called me in and he said, teams that win a lot play teams that lose a lot. And I'm going to fix the schedule for you. I'm going to help you with the schedule. And I didn't understand at the time. I was coming out of the NFL, and that was we just didn't think about a lot of things. But if you've played teams that lose a lot, then that has a huge impact. I don't vote anymore because I'm not coaching anymore, but the difficulty of schedule has to be the biggest parameter.
And yet we have not yet seen a team in the playoff in 2 years that has 2 losses. That hasn't happened yet. It's all been undefeated or 1-loss teams. You got to think at some point a 2-loss team will get in based on strength of schedule. Honestly, Stanford could have potentially done that this year and jumped Oklahoma, because I do think Stanford played a tougher schedule. But how do you balance that? I think that's what they're having to deal with right now.
Well, I think Notre Dame is a 2-loss team that has an argument.
Sure.
Who were the 2 losses?
At Clemson, on the road by 2 points.
And at Stanford.
And at Stanford
and
on
that
the
one
last
was a
second field goal.
heartbreaker there. I mean, that was like a sure win. So I think it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when.
Should this thing be closed to teams that don't win conference championships? We've now gotten to a point where in these 2 years it's been all conference champions, but I think there was a way for Ohio State to get in this year without winning their division. Just personally, do you think you should have to win a conference championship to get in?
I do. I think you need to win your conference to have an opportunity to go forward. I think that should be a prerequisite, because you have to play most everybody in your league. And so it obviously adds another playoff game. And so if you want 3 playoff games, that's where it's at right there. Have your conference championships.
It helps you pick 4. There has to be some cutoff to pick 4 and end the argument.
Right.
So you need to know that going in, and we all do.
With Oklahoma, I think that the one thing that is shown here is, and Alabama as well, I still think we're in a mentality of it's better to lose early than lose late. Is that fair to some of these teams?
They remember what you do in November in college football. That's always been the case, whether it's bowl selection or now into this playoff world. They're going to remember what you do in November. Like it or not, live with it. You better be a good November team.
And I think it's the best football team at the end of the year, not at the beginning of the year. And that's the reason you have a playoff. And you're going to have some teams that are going to lose, and at the end of the year, they're going to be the much better team at some point or the other. So I think it's going to end up happening that way.
A big part of great coaches is that you see their teams develop as the year goes along. You may not be very good in your second game. If you're really good by your 12th game, that means a lot.
The one thing we've seen now with this playoff is the SEC had won 7 championships in a row. The last BCS, Florida State ended that streak. And then last year, Ohio State got one for the Big Ten. Do you guys see the landscape evening out at all among the conferences?
I think 4 teams makes that a greater opportunity to occur. There are a lot, and there have been. Even when the SEC was winning that streak, there were other really good football teams in the country. I think the 2 probably helped that happen. I think the 4, you'll see SEC teams win it.
Sure.
But you're going to see Big Ten and Pac-12 and Big 12 and SEC and maybe somebody else as we go further into this. It's going to be interesting.
Do you guys see any opportunity for a team outside the so-called Power 5 to get in at this point, Tommy?
I hope we're outside the Power 5. That's hard to do. Your schedule has to be set up in such a way where, we'd have to play probably 2, maybe 3 Power 5 teams in non-conference, and then go through your conference and then win. Sooner or later, it's going to happen where a Power 5 team possibly does that, goes all the way through, wins a championship, and is undefeated, and you don't have an undefeated team in the top 4, and then you might be able to jump into that. So I think it's you got to always give it the possibility, because if you don't, then you're basically limited to about 60, 65 teams, and you don't want to do that. We want to give everybody an opportunity, and that's where Houston, our champion, will probably play in one of the at-large bowls, which they had a heck of a football team, ended up 12-1, and again, I think could play pretty much with anybody on a 1-game schedule.
quickly, what do you guys think about the weekly rankings that the committee has done? Obviously we have the Amway coaches poll. The committee, they kind of do their own thing. They change it up every week. I'm sure they consider the coaches poll and some other factors. Do you like having that out there every week?
They don't say they use the coaches poll, but I guarantee you they do. Who would know more about it than the coaches that actually vote? So I've voted for a long time in the coaches poll, and I would be, hopefully that they open it up and look at it a little bit. David, what do you think?
Oh, I think they have to. They're human.
Yeah.
Before they put anything out, think about the timing of when they come out. We're putting it out on Sunday. What is it, Tuesday evening?
Right.
Somebody's reading something.
Yeah, and we're pretty close.
Yeah.
Well, as everybody in this room knows, we're in the era where publicity is one of the most important, if not the most important thing, and it's a hot topic. So it's something more for us to talk about and complain about. So it brings more attention.
Well, we only have a couple more minutes here, so I just want to get a quick prediction of who you guys think will be holding this trophy at the end of the day.
You want me to go? You want me to go first?
I'll go first.
All right.
I'm going to go first. I'm going to say Oklahoma.
Interesting. Why?
Just because they do something a little bit different with a quarterback that is, he's got magic. I mean, he's the type of kid that has magic in it. He doesn't have to do it but a few times to get it done. It's a 2-game schedule.
I think it's Clemson and Alabama in the championship game.
Well, you got to pick one.
I know. I'm getting there. I'm getting there.
You made me look bad right off the bat.
I know. No. I think that's what we're going to see, and I think it'll be an emotional circumstance. But I think Deshaun Watson will be the difference. And Clemson can match Alabama's speed on defense, same type people. I think Clemson wins the national championship. Go Dabo.
All right, Coach Curry.
Well, I love Dabo and I love Deshaun Watson, but I don't think they'll beat Alabama. When a guy goes to the University of Alabama to be a football player, he understands that there's one goal, and you don't have to tell him. It's built into his heart from the time he's in the cradle, and it is national championship. And that's awful hard to beat, and it's especially awful hard to beat when there are more great athletes there and a front seven like they've never had before. I just think Alabama's got too many athletes.
Well, I want to thank everybody in the audience today here at the College Football Hall of Fame, everybody watching via the web at usatoday.com. Thank the American Football Coaches Association and Amway. It's been a wonderful event again this year. And Coach Bill Curry, Coach David Cutcliffe, Coach Tommy Tuberville for joining us here live. It's been a great discussion, and I hope everyone enjoys the college football playoff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.
All right.
Man, you're great.